Hello everybody, and thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be tying a few North Country spiders from what I like to call the A and B style. Namely, I'll be doing a Snipe and Purple, a Partridge and Orange, and a Woodcock and Red. For the Snipe and Purple I'm going to be using some purple silk, surprisingly enough, and some snipe. And for this pattern I'm going to be using the under coverts from the wing. So here we're looking at the bottom of the wing, and it's these small grey, soft-stemmed, soft-barbed feathers here. Make a lovely soft mobile hackle. Here's the snipe itself. It's a funny looking bird and quite tricky to hunt because they're very quick flyers. In fact, it's where we get the word sniper from, someone who's such a good marksman that they can take down snipe. For the partridge and orange I'm going to be using some orange silk and a partridge skin, and looking at the partridge, up near the neck we've got these nice fine, somewhat smaller feathers, really nicely speckled and dappled. Lovely, lovely material to work with. Finally, for the Woodcock and Red, I'm sure you can guess what's coming. These silks are all from 54 Dean Street. They're colour matched to the original Pearsall silks, which are sadly no longer made. Looking at the woodcock, we're going to be using the over coverts from the top of the wing, and they've got that lovely barred, speckled texture to them. Again, fantastic material. Up at the head end, it's always worth securing your knots with a little dab of varnish, and it's very helpful to have some wax handy when you're tying, especially with silk. For the hooks, I like to use these partridge hooks. They've got a slightly shorter shank than the traditional ones, but a nice wide gape. And for consistency, I'm going to be tying all these patterns on size 14. I'd just like to give you a quick overview of some of my favourite books about North Country flies. This is an excellent primer by Mike Harding. Sadly it's out of print now, but if you can get hold of a copy. My main supplier for fishing books is Cocky Bondi Books, also known as Angle Books. That's where I got these from. This is an excellent one, goes into many of the most common traditional and modern fly patterns. If you were going really traditional, Edmonds and Lee is an absolute classic book about the soft hackles. It's faithfully reproduced here, including all of the colour plates, some of the history of the fly, some of the core techniques, hook equivalencies, colour charts for the silks. Fantastic resource if you're looking to tie these lovely traditional patterns. This was actually one of the first fishing books to use colour photography as a medium to inform and educate, and it's worth getting for that historicity alone. For a more detailed dive into the world of soft-hackled flies in Yorkshire and the north of England, this rather hefty tome by Robert Smith gives an excellent overview of the history, going all the way back to 15th century, Dame Juliana, some of the soft-hackle traditions in Spain, goes through some of the classic recipes, the histories of the North Country Club, and again beautifully illustrated and photographed. I got all of these through Cocky Bondi Books, and I'd recommend them all to anybody. Finally, and possibly the cutest book in my entire collection, this is a reproduction of John Swarbrick's list of fly dressings. Swarbrick was one of the first to codify the traditional flies that he saw fishermen using in his local area up in the north of England, and this is a very, very cute but beautifully letterpress printed reproduction bound in this gorgeous marbled paper. Again, absolutely fantastic. And this being a limited edition, it did actually come with a companion volume demonstrating the 30 flies listed in the book, all expertly tied and beautifully presented in this little concertinaed book. Again, a fantastic resource. Not many of these around, so I was very happy to be able to get my hands on one, and it's got pride of place in my collection on the shelf. I will do a video at some point about my little fly tying library, show you the books that I like to use and where I get my inspiration from. So let's get started. We'll begin with the Snipe and Purple. I've waxed the first several centimetres of my purple silk, caught it in a couple of millimetres behind the hook eye to define the length of the body, and as we run it down the hook shank, we come to the first dilemma. How long do we make our bodies? The traditional guidance is to stop it right about where I have here, that is to say midway between the barb and the point of the hook. However, with this being a somewhat shorter shanked hook than is traditional, I do like to give it just a couple of extra wraps, stopping just in front of the barb, a little further back. I think it looks more proportionate on the fly, but again, it's a matter for personal opinion. I don't think that it's a debate that's going to be going away anytime soon. I'm just showing you how I like to tie mine. Either way, make sure to keep the body nice and slim. When it comes to tying in the hackles, there's two main ways to do this. My preference, and the way I'll demonstrate here, is with the stripped butt of the feather pointing towards the tail of the fly, as shown here. You can also do it with the stem pointing forwards. The main difference between these two is the way in which you need to tie it in. The way that I'm demonstrating here, I want the natural dish-shaped curve of the feather pointing away from myself and draped over the fly. If you're tying it in with the stem forwards, make sure it's pointing towards yourself. For the vast majority of ties that wrap materials away from themselves, this means that whichever way you do it, it'll fall back naturally into that nice umbrella-shaped hackle pointing towards the rear of the fly that we're aiming for. I've secured down my hackle with 4 tight wraps of well-waxed thread. We can trim away the excess. And now, grasping it in my hackle pliers, we can start to make our wraps. These are delicate feathers. If you can do these flies, you can do just about any soft hackle. But just make sure to use only the minimum of pressure and try and avoid any sharp and jerky movements, because these tips can snap away. Again, you can see here, the feather's trying to escape from me a little bit. I'm just going to draw it back and make my second turn. And this brings us on to the next great debate in spider tying, is how many turns of hackle should you use? My opinion is really that do what looks right and what looks balanced for the fly. There are some people, apparently with more time on their hands than I have, that will count the individual hackle barbs. I have read that some people think that 13 is the optimum number. Some people swear by 1 turn, some people swear by 2 or 2.5. Ultimately, do what looks right and do what looks balanced for the individual fly. For me, that's normally 2 to 2.5 turns. It's something that's been debated about for hours and will no doubt continue to be debated about, and that's before we even get into whether we should be doing circumferential hackles or aiming for it to be above and below the hook shank. But my suggestion is don't get too caught up in the dogma. There's a reason these flies have been around for hundreds of years, and it's because they work. Tie things that look nice to you and that work for the type of fishing that you want to do, and don't sweat the small stuff. What I do always do on these flies, mind you, is varnish the head, both to protect the knot and to slightly darken the silk up at the head end. Now, a final adjustment of the hackle. Sometimes, if it's really not behaving, steaming it over a kettle can be helpful. And you can see we've got the lovely, soft, supple snipe that's going to make a really nice action in the water. Now, with some orange silk, I'm sure you can guess that we're going to proceed with the Partridge and Orange. So again, I've built up the body in the exact same way. This is consistent across all of the A and B series, as I like to call them. We can get into more complicated spiders later on. The partridge feather has a slightly more pronounced curvature to it, as I'm demonstrating here, and that's the same thing I was talking about earlier with the snipe. Make sure that that's pointing away from you if you're using the technique here, or towards yourself if you're using the handle forward technique. But either way, I've tied it in the same way, 4 turns, well waxed thread, and now drawing the fibres back, going to make 2 turns. I could probably have got away with 1.5 for this pattern, to be honest, but so long as it looks proportionate and it looks like it's got the right number of legs and the right amount of bugginess and winginess and legginess. These are very impressionist flies. I think they rely a lot on the mobility that they have in the water with these lovely soft hackles, and a lot about the presentation, and maybe a little bit with the colour as well. I'm not quite sure what the fish take them for, whether they think that they're drowned insects or larvae, or sometimes even nymphs or chironomids. But either way, there's a reason that they've stuck around this long, and it's because they're effective flies. With the hackle tied in, going to make a couple of turns back, build up a small head, whip finish, varnish, and that's the Partridge and Orange. Again, these are very much variations upon a theme. Different hackles are from different game birds and wild birds, many of which are actually protected nowadays. Most of us wouldn't dream of using dotterel or brown owl, but modern substitutes work as well. There's no reason to go out and collect endangered species, but they were tied with what was available locally, and that includes the silks. And again, this is something that some people get very caught up about, hunting eBay for rare and discontinued Pearsall silks. There's nothing magical about Pearsalls, it's just what was available locally. The north was a powerhouse of textile manufacturing, and that's what was available, but the modern substitutes work fine. Moving on to the red and woodcock. I've tied in the red, now I'm going to tie in the woodcock, exactly the same technique as before. This has got slightly thicker, slightly fuzzier individual feather barbs. It creates a very nice effect. Again, trimming away the excess. And luckily I find that woodcock's got a slightly stronger stem than some of the other fibres that we work with. Waterhen is an absolute nightmare of mine. I cannot seem to get my skin to work for me. Normally takes 3 or 4 goes to get it to go where I want without snapping off the tip, but well, we're still learning, we're still practicing. I think this is just a skill that comes with time. Same technique as before. I'm going to make 2 wraps again, drawing back the fibres. You can see that that's going to give a lovely mottled effect. Makes a very attractive pattern. Here I've made a little bit too much, so I'm going to kink the feather fibre forwards around the silk as I draw it around. You can see I'm just going to divert around that excess bit of feather barb there, make 1 turn in front to secure because I've done some manoeuvring, and then drawing the feather stem forwards, we can snip that away, and the excess fibres that we worked around earlier. Just a little dodge for getting around it if you've tied on a slightly too large a feather. Again, a small head, whip finish, varnish, and that's the fly done. So, hope you've enjoyed these 3 different patterns but all variations on a theme. Feel free to experiment. Brahma hen can work beautifully, hen hackles can work beautifully, any game bird, and even things that we wouldn't ordinarily think about, and pheasant necks and things like that can give fantastic hackles. And I think that if you can find something that's soft and supple and mobile in the water, just try a few colour combinations and you never know, you might come up with the next big thing. So let's take a look at our finished flies. The Snipe and Purple has that thin, webby, very supple snipe feather, and you'll notice that each of them are subtly different, just the characteristics of the feather. The Partridge, as shown here, is a little bit thinner, a little bit stiffer perhaps even, but still supple enough to move in the water, and it's got that lovely speckling like the joints in an insect's leg. Each of these birds has got their own characteristics, and these patterns make full use of those. And the Woodcock is a little bit thicker and fuzzier and still nice and mobile, lots of movement, but they're all individual in their own way, and they've all got their place. So, I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to some of the simple but classic North Country patterns. They're easy enough to tie once you get the hang of them, so do give it a go. Thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video.